Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show.
In the 1800s, right after slavery, there was fear that black folk were going to vote in this country, and they made the conscious decision, this is in the legislative record, that they were going to find a way to disenfranchise African Americans by creating laws that said if you have broken a law, you lose your right to vote forever. And they created black codes and began to systematically disenfranchise African Americans. Well, today we know we have a war on drugs, which is not a war on drugs, it's a war on people. And it's not a war on all people. It's a war on particular folks. No difference in America between blacks and whites for using drugs or even selling drugs, but African Americans are 4 times more likely to be arrested for those crimes than someone white. Well, guess what? A black in America is 4 times more likely to have lost their voting rights because of felony disenfranchisement. Laws are on the books. Look at the legislative record from our history that traces back to the time of Reconstruction. History matters.
Right. Amen.
Why is New Jersey one of the top 5 states in America for segregation? We don't have de jure segregation anymore in America, but we have one of the most segregated states in our nation. This is not just some accident. This goes back to decades ago in our history where there were laws affecting where we were putting public housing. Laws like redlining coming from Washington, supported by our state, creating the reality we now live in. History matters.
Yes, it does.
And the challenge is, as people try to obscure history and erase history, they have an assault on our history. We lose those cords that are necessary now to bind up this nation and make us one and unified. They are doing an assault not just on historical figures of importance, but they're assaulting the very ideals of our country. They're assaulting ourselves. When you sanitize and you homogenize American history, what you do to it is you lessen the greatness of our country. You diminish the greatness of individuals who overcame bigotry, who overcame hate, who overcame outrageous obstacles to bring us to where we are today. When you tell the truth about hate and bigotry and violence and suppression and slavery, when you tell those truths, you begin to see today with its greater glory.
Again for joining another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. And in that opening clip, what you heard was our U.S. Senator, Cory, the senator from New Jersey. He was at an event recently in Camden, New Jersey, to commemorate the 3 historical sites where slaves were sold in the 17 and the 1800s. It's documented that slaves were sold in Cooper's Point, now called Camden, at 3 ferry landings at Cooper Street, Cooper's Point, and Federal Street. And the event unveiled the markings that will be on display at Cooper and Front Street, Federal and State Street, and Delaware Ave and Jersey Joe Walcott Boulevard. Many people may not know that Camden, New Jersey was a site where our ForeParents were sold and auctioned And today's conversation is, have we remembered the prayers of our foreparents? And if we remember the prayers of our foreparents, are our actions today reflecting an answer to what our foreparents prayed for during that treacherous experience of slavery here in North America? And what we know is that today's cultural, social, and economic conditions are directly influenced of the events of the past within American history. And as a teacher and as a student, it is always important that we talk about what's happened in our past and our history, because we have to understand how they are affecting the conditions that we live in today and that are affecting us today. So I usually describe it like this because I know a lot of people, say that was then, this is now, and we should not live in the past. But I want to share how the past will impact the future. So any of us who have ever attended, I'm sure we've all attended our family doctor, and when we go to the doctor, our medical practitioner, if this one is one that is worth his or her salt, will ask us about our family medical history. They may ask, are your grandparents still alive? They may ask about your parents. Do you have a history of high blood pressure? Do you have a history of high cholesterol? Is there cancer in your family? Prostate cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, ovarian cancer? Because our family medical history will give our medical practitioner insight into what to observe us for in our present and future. So there may be attention to our blood pressure if we have a history of medical problems in our families regarding blood pressure. If we have a history of hyperlipidemia, high cholesterol, then that's something that our doctors would be paying particular attention to. If we don't have any history of cancer, then our doctors may not think it's necessary to order certain tests at earlier ages. So it's important even in the medical field history. And it is certainly important that we understand our history from a cultural aspect, from a social aspect. And we cannot be put off, we should not be put off by the study of our history, which does include slavery. For us as Black people in America, we should not look at our slavery history as a history that is embarrassing or a history that is shameful, because we were not the enslavers, we were not the encaptors, we were not those who robbed a group of people, millions and millions and tens of millions of people, of their human dignity. This is not something that we did to another. This is something that has happened to us, and we cannot shame or blame ourselves as a victim of that experience. And there are many other groups who have had not similar experiences to us, because the experience that we had is certainly unique in not just its severity, but also in the length of time in which our dignities were robbed and stolen from us. But there are other groups of people who have experiences with captivity, who have experience with genocide. And those individuals, those groups, and those cultures do not shame themselves or blame themselves, but they do remember their history, and they carve out a course in the present and for their future to preserve their history so that everyone will remember exactly what happened, because there are things that they don't want to return to, and they won't let other people return them to that terrible traumatic condition. And so as Black people in America, we too should remember that history. We should remind others of that history. And especially in raising our children, we should share with them the history that we've experienced in America. And I don't say that we should study history as a means for us to become hyped into emotional rhetoric, because our history has not just slavery, but also in America, after the emancipation of the slaves, then there were black codes. There were black codes that made certain characteristics of black people criminal. So, for example, if it was a crime that we were unemployed and we had to go to our former slave masters for employment, and then in the return, we had a experience called sharecropping. And those who did not do that, who were unemployed, and if they were caught by the police, then they were sent to prison. And being jobless should not be a crime. So in America, there are black codes. There were conditions that were stated in the law that were illegal among black people. We also had Jim Crow, as many of us know, and I'm sure I am telling the audience a history that we should all know. And so our history has a mark of pain attached to it here in America. And that's okay. That is okay. It did happen. But based on what happened, how are we using that history to influence the steps that we make today? So history should be a substance that will guide us and motivate us and inform us and inspire us, but not just as a means that would hype us into an emotional rhetoric. Because this is something that we've done in America, is that when we retell history, we do it from an emotional point of view. And again, the experiences that we have were certainly grievous, were certainly painful, and to think about our human dignities to be robbed in such a cruel and inhumane way is a painful thing to recount. But even in that pain, what lessons are we taking away to inform our next steps? So when I think about what I am striving to do with my life, what I'm striving to do with the platforms that have been given to me, and the platforms that I'm creating for myself, I think, what might our slave foreparents prayed for? And are my actions an answer to those potential prayers? And so I would imagine that our foreparents prayed for an end to the physical and emotional suffering. I imagine that our foreparents prayed for the opportunity to keep our families intact. I mean, I'm a mother now with children, and when I think about looking at my children on an auction block being sold away into the plantation of another slave master, and I know about the cruel and inhumane treatment, and that I won't be there to provide any comfort. I mean, that is a painful, painful imagination or thing to imagine. And this is just in my mind. I couldn't imagine the sisters who had to endure that and the fathers who had to endure that, watching their children being sold away. And you see the tears and the struggle of the children, and the struggle and the tears of the parents, the mother and the father. I imagine that our foreparents prayed for self-determination, an opportunity, excuse me, to guide their own steps, to be the master of their own domain, so that they can determine how they come, how they go, how they work, how they love, how they marry, how they rear their children, how they determine their diet, how they develop their economic system. This is something that all sovereign, free, and independent people are able to enjoy. But our parents, our foreparents, did not have that opportunity during that 400 years of slavery in America. I imagine that our foreparents prayed for the opportunity to recover from the effects of the slavery experience and the conditions that they endured. So slavery wasn't just something that happened in which our foreparents were captive. They were made to be stored in the bottom of slave ships. They were made to endure harsh conditions over the Atlantic Ocean. And those conditions are things that we can see at the museums that they have here in America. And they were just treacherous. And then they're here on the shores of America and in the Caribbean. And it wasn't just that they worked. It wasn't just that they worked without pay. It wasn't just that they were beaten and whipped and lynched and raped. It wasn't just that, but it was also the destruction of the morale. It was the destruction of the will. Because remember, those who are listening, when our foreparents were captive in Africa as people who would be brought to the Americas to be sold, they were in chains, they were in shackles. But when we fast forward through the history, we know that in the 1700s, 1800s, and even the 1600s, our people did not work the plantations with shackles, because the shackles that were on their feet when they knew that they were free, the shackles that were around their necks and on their hands when they knew that they were free in Africa, the will to be free and the will to flee was broken here in the Americas. And so our foreparents worked the slaves unshackled, untethered a lot of times. And so you think, well, they just could have ran, but the will was broken. And then once the will for self was broken, there was no need to shackle our foreparents physically any longer. So the slavery experience wasn't just something that was a physical, harsh experience, physically harsh experience, but it was also a mentally harsh experience. Trauma is now the buzzword in America now, and there's a lot of practitioners practicing trauma-informed treatments, trauma-informed care. Consider the trauma that our foreparents endured on the plantations here in America. As early as children, watching a father, an uncle, a man from amongst your own people being hung or being lynched or being castrated or being maimed so that he could not run away to freedom. Imagine seeing this as a child. And we know that they would bring the slaves out into the areas where they would punish to make that person an example, to discourage other slaves from seeking to be free or from talking back or from being defiant. This was a practice that the slave master would employ. Fear is a practice that the slave master would employ so that our people would stay in line and stay submissive, so that they would fear the punishment. They didn't want to endure it, so they would just do exactly what they were told. So this experience traumatized us generation after generation. We were traumatized mentally and emotionally. And so I could imagine that our foreparents prayed for the recovery, the mental, emotional, and moral recovery, rehabilitation of that condition that they were in. I imagine that when our foreparents prayed, they prayed for the opportunity to unite with their own people and to be viewed as people with human rights. The slave masters treated the people on the plantation many times worse than the cattle was treated. And when you're enduring that from another person, from if it's a man doing it to a man, or if it's the slave mistress doing this to the slave woman, you know that these people do not see you as people with human rights or as an entitlement to rights. And so how do you deal with that? How do you manage your pain? And so I imagine a lot of times there was a lot of suppression. There was a lot of repression of that rage, of that outrage. How could you treat me with such indignity? And I know that as a free person today, I couldn't imagine being treated with such indignities, but this was a common practice and a common experience for our foreparents. And so I would imagine that they prayed for the ability to be seen and treated as people with full and complete human rights. I would imagine that our foreparents prayed as men for the opportunity to protect his woman and his children. I imagine he prayed that his woman would just be his woman and wouldn't be taken to the quarters of the slave master, and that I would imagine that the woman prayed for the protection of her children and herself so that she would not have to suffer the indignities of being taken to the slave master's quarters and then returned to the slave quarters to the man that she actually loved, and then to carry a child and not know whose child it was fathered by, or excuse me, what man had fathered that child, that I imagine that would have caused such stress. That there's a man that you love, that's a man that you want to be with and be married to, but he is not yours alone because he has to be shared to sire children among the plantation. And then you are not his alone, and you're not yours alone. You're not determining who you're looking to mate with or marry with because you are the property of a slave master who can access you at any time. So I imagine that the prayers of our foreparents were for mercy in this life. The slave masters gave us their religion and taught us of obedience and humility and submission, and then we would receive a peaceful and bountiful heaven in the next life. And I imagine that our foreparents prayed for that mercy in this life, that they didn't have to wait to get to heaven. They didn't have to wait to die a physical death to have a spiritual heaven. And so, in just thinking about some of these prayers that our foreparents may have prayed, are our actions. And I think that this is something that we have to ask ourselves. I think this is a conversation that we must have with those who we're close with those whom we're in organizations with. Are our actions, are we setting forth the conditions that are the answers to the prayers of our foreparents? Our foreparents, in some of what I discussed there, their prayers weren't to vote. Their prayers weren't for jobs. They were brought here to do a job, and they did that job. They did not pray for fine cars. They did not pray for the latest fashions. They did not pray so that they could have money. In what I discussed, the prayers were for the opportunity for self-determination in a condition where permission wasn't a requirement. Much of what we do today, we do looking for the approval or seeking the permission of our former slave masters because today we're free. We have been emancipated. Although our communities still suffer the consequences of that tradition of American slavery, we are free people in a manner of speaking, but we are not free indeed because we do not operate like free people. And so we are not today the people that our our foreparents who were enslaved prayed for. Our conditions do not reflect the conditions that they might have prayed for. And I say that, and this may be harsh, but I want this to be an encouragement that we consider the actions that we're taking. We consider the decisions that we're making. If we think about education, our foreparents needed the conditions where they can go and do something for themselves so that they can be free of the anxiety of what might happen if they speak their mind. So when we think about education today, a lot of us see education as a social status, but the education that we should be seeking, or rather what we should do with education, is use it to function. Use it to function in a way to express self-determination, not just get an education so that we can get a job, but get an education so that we can acquire a skill or so that we can acquire knowledge to apply it in the conditions within our lives. And when we are encouraging our young people to get an education, we all need jobs and we need employment, but it must be greater than that. How can we make a contribution for the community? Because when we get a job and we're paying taxes, we are paying taxes to set some of the conditions that continue some of the suffering that we are existing in today. And the conditions in our communities are, quite frankly, unfavorable conditions. And we do have some flourishing communities of Black people, but we cannot look at just some who are flourishing and think that we have made it when all of us are not flourishing, because we and our brothers and sisters are one. And I am so encouraged by those who I see in our communities that are looking to help us take the education that we have and be empowered and use that towards economic development. We just came through Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, and Cyber Monday. And I saw a lot of online and social media, a great push for us to support our own businesses and to support each other economically because others are creating their own communities and we can do the same. So, for example, Chinatown is an example of that, of a group of people who think the same, who speak the same, who are putting their money and circling their dollars within their community. And no one sees that as racist. No one sees that as prejudicial. We just see a group of people putting their dollars together and getting it together. We see this in certain areas of New Jersey where there's a large Indian community, where they circle their dollars amongst each other and they're building schools and they have their places of worship, they have their cultural centers. And this is just right and this just makes sense. And as Black people here in America, we should be using these examples because our foreparents did not pray that we can get on Instagram or that we can get on BET or MTV and disgrace ourselves like we see. And this is what we are allowed to do. This is what is promoted for us because it maintains the mental and the spiritual and the emotional enslavement, and it also maintains the economic power of our former slave masters. So there's a lot that I said. I want to play another small clip of what our U.S. Senator said, Cory Booker, and then I'll come back and we'll close this out.
It means so much to me that folk get this truth. Slaves were sold right here. This part of our history must be remembered. They assaulted dignity with violence, criminality, robbery. But that dignity persevered. They tried to strip history and culture and religion, but that spirit persevered. Right. They tried to trod in the very dirt, but still like dust, we rose. That's all right.
But still like dust, we rise. There were some powerful words by our Senator Cory Booker from the great state of New Jersey. And I agree with what he said at the beginning of that clip that it is time for some truth telling here in America. And some of that truth, brothers and sisters, we must tell to ourselves. While it is certainly a necessary action to speak to those who are in leadership and who are in power. And we also must come and speak a powerful word to our communities. As slaves were sold and auctioned here on the ground in Camden, New Jersey, at those 3 points that I mentioned earlier, Cooper's Point, Cooper Street, and on Federal Street, on the same ground that our brothers and sisters were sold, we still find ourselves in a sometimes moral, emotional, definitely economic suffering condition today. But it doesn't have to be that way. And we do have the opportunity to continue in the trajectory of real freedom, of true freedom, of the independent self-determination that our foreparents prayed for, of the unity and love amongst each other that we prayed for, of the restoration of our dignity and of our humanity, and certainly gaining the pride and integrity that we once had as a people who come from such royalty. There are no people found that exist before us, brothers and sisters. We are the first people. They have not found any fossils that were older than the African fossils. So we have a great legacy, not just in Africa, but all around the world. And we can create a legacy here in America that might have had the initial stain of slavery, and we can use that history to inspire and inform us, and just recognizing the ability to have the resilience that has us here today. We just came out of the second term of the first black president in America, and that wasn't the end. That wasn't the cap that we should put on the greatness that we can achieve to. That was just a small step in the right direction. But we don't also need to look to Washington, D.C. or Capitol Hill for us to see and achieve greatness. Brothers and sisters, we can look around us by improving our communities, by looking to do better and be better with one another, by building strong families, by supporting black businesses, by being lovers of education, not for social status, but so that we can function in a better capacity. Think about and remember our foreparents prayed for something when they were suffering, when they were struggling, when they wanted to be free, when they wanted to be free of the human indignities that they suffered. Think about, do our actions reflect more of that suffering? Are our actions sustaining suffering, or are our actions ending suffering? And brothers and sisters, we have the opportunity to continue moving in the direction to end suffering and even achieve prosperity. When I talk to young people, I tell them that no group has a monopoly on prosperity. And that is something that is available to us all if we take the right actions to do so. So, brothers and sisters, it was wonderful sharing this with you. Camden is the first city in New Jersey to receive its marker, and Paterson was also another area in New Jersey where there were slaves brought and sold and auctioned off. And this is a history that we must know. This is a history that we must share with our children. And I'm so glad that this history is being preserved. And I've enjoyed being with you. I pray that you've enjoyed the broadcast. And I look forward to talking with you more next time. Thank you again for listening to the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for another episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, norazahira.com. Or if you have a listener question that you would like me to answer on air, you can email me at questions@norazahira.com. You can also follow me on Facebook at Noor Zahira Muhammad and on Instagram at NoraZ20. I'll be sure to include links to the above in today's show notes. If this show has value to you, please like and subscribe and share it out with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.